So first the good news. Their attempts with the Britney Spears and the Nazi passports and the digital ID all fell on its backside. People weren't prepared to go along with it. That failed. Then we've had Ukraine. People not interested in that. I've never seen any flags around here in Finland, and I reckon back in the UK the number of people still doing the Slava for Ukraine virtue signalling is rapidly diminishing, and people aren't so happy about having their taxes spent on fighting a war in some distant country over something that they care very little about. Then we've got the 15-minute cities. They're not going well either. Huge amounts of pushback, and it's exactly as I predicted. Asking people to wear a slave muzzle in return for furlough and working from home was an easy sell. 15-minute cities is going to impact even the most hardened of virtue signallers, because they actually have to give something up. You know, their foreign holidays, driving around in their 4x4, they won't have it. So that is also going to fall on its backside. The economic system is I nearly said a rude word there, but it is irreparably damaged. Let's put it that way. So in the future, you know, a new monetary system will be needed. They may well try programmable CBDCs. That will not fly. People will not accept it. So basically what we're looking at then is, in this video, is the future. I don't think, well, we can't go back to the past. We can't go back to the old normal, because the old normal was based on a debt-based monetary system that's basically carrying too much debt and is no longer financially and socially sustainable. You know, the only thing that this great reset achieved was a massive awakening of people to the evils of politicians and the current financial system, which has been screwing people over. So what I'm saying here is that the old system's gone, and their new system that they envisaged for us ain't happening. So I was listening to this Lance from Rise Above, and he was basically saying, you know, if you tear down an old system, you got to have something to replace it with, and that's what I want to talk about for the rest of the video. So, you know, the first thing is there'll be some people that want to try to reconstruct what we've previously had, you know, that's been based around a big government. So these people I would sort of call socialists. So they'll want a new big mummy government system to replace the old mummy government system that wanted to exploit them and or bump them off. You know, so they'll want you know, some more social security, pensions, state indoctrination camps, I mean schools. They'll want a health service run by the government that tries to kill them. They'll want all of that big government stuff back again, reconfigured slightly, run by a different group of politicians who are going to be miraculously different from the previous set of politicians. So I'm going to address that now. So if you want that, you're nuts, you're deluded. The main thing to understand is what type of person is attracted into politics. Answer is, it's the worst of us. You know, people who are attracted into politics are attracted by power over fellow human beings. So the idea of these people going to be that they're going to be well intentioned towards you is naive in the extreme. The type of person that's going to be attracted into politics is going to be psychopaths and sociopaths, and they're going to construct a system that's good for them and bad for you, and they're going to enjoy having power over you. So it doesn't matter, you know, even if you get a nice politician in charge for a while by some miracle, they'll be quickly supplanted by some sociopath. So we have to move away, I believe, from this kind of belief that a big centralised intrusive government that runs every aspect of our life, we have to move away from this. This is not good for us. And I think also as well, expecting the government to look after you. Well, if you live in a society like that, you're going to have a lot of people with mental health problems, because human beings are meant to be autonomous. We're born with free will. That's the way that God designed us. And you need to, I don't know, discover some self-respect if you think that. You know, you're here, you're born on earth for a purpose. And that purpose is to serve your fellow man. Yeah, so just because you breathe oxygen doesn't entitle you to a share of the wealth created by other people who have used their talents in the service of other people. So we have to move away from this kind of, I want a paternalistic government that's going to look after me, even though I contribute the square root of diddly squatch to the rest of society. If we don't move away from that mentality, then we are sunk. It's just going to be more of the same. The other word that's really, really important is centralization. Centralized systems are an absolute nightmare, because you only need to nobble one or two people at the top to create an awful lot of harm that affects millions of people. And that's basically, you know, if you look at the education system in Britain and the healthcare system in Britain, why are both so bad? Answer is that they're both highly centralized systems. And the future that I would want is the opposite of that, is decentralization. So, you know, we need to scrap things like the national curriculum. We need to get away from any idea that the government is going to be in charge of what schools teach. We're not going to have any schools inspectors. You know, forcing schools to adopt particular teaching methods. We need to move well away from that. You know, you can maybe begin to see this with all the kind of rainbow child abuse that's being forced on schools by governments. So we need to move right away from that, and we need to have decentralized, privately owned schools. You know, so some people, socialists, will say, well, what about poor people? They won't be able to afford private schools. Well, the first thing to say against that is, at the moment, poor people pay tax. If we dismantle the state, we don't need to collect in as much taxation, so people have more of their own money left over to spend on things like educating their own kids. The other thing that I would say is that at the moment, state education's not working. Kids are not being educated in the state sector, or if they are being educated, they're being educated in the wrong things. They're being abused by the state with all the rainbow waffle, and you know, it's nothing less than child abuse. So, you know, to say, well, what we're going to do if we get rid of the state education system, you know, it's going to be terrible. Well, what we've got now, the state isn't running an effective system now. The same would apply to social security. You know, if people say, well, if you got rid of that, then what are poor people going to do? Well, my answer to that is, like, what are poor people doing now? You know, they're homeless on the streets. They're not being looked after by the state. The state doesn't care about them at all. They pay taxes, get nothing back in return. The system that I'm proposing is people keep more of the money that they've earned themselves serving one another, and they decide how the money's spent. And the beauty of that is then that the providers of the services that you buy have got a vested interest in listening to what you actually want, which doesn't exist at the moment in the state sector, because state schools, there is no profit. They just kowtow to whatever the government wants, which is normally bad for you and your kids. So with privately run schools, you could have a wide variety of different types of schools. You know, so you'd actually have decent vocational education, for example, because there would be a market. Some entrepreneur might set up a school to train plumbers, or something else that's actually useful. You know, electricians, carpenters, skills that society, computer programmers, skills that are actually in demand by employers. And also, because the customer has the cash, they're paying the fees themselves, the schools have to provide what students want to a good level. And people will take more of an interest in their educations because there's no more of this kind of mummy government will look after you mentality without you having to lift a finger. So again, some people won't like this. They'll think that they have a divine right to live off the incomes of other people, but that leads to tyranny, basically, which is what we've had for far too long, where the state tells you what you can and can't do with your own money, and they confiscate, I don't know, like for me, when I was a teacher, I was paying 40% income tax, 10% national insurance, 20% VAT, so what's that, 40, 50, 60, 70%, plus excise duty on top. So it's, the last pound of income that I'd earn, effectively I was only keeping about 30p in the pound. Everything else was being confiscated from me and blown on stupid stuff like housing rubber boat people in 4-star hotels. And if I complained about that, I was then called a far-right extremist. So we have to end this system that we've got now, which is based on oppression. We need to have a system based on individual freedom, where all transactions are voluntary. So that basically means just scrapping the state. The only legitimate role for the state should be the provision of law and order and national defence, and that's it. We can't trust politicians. If we do, then what happens is, basically what we've experienced for most of our lives. And these people will just keep on pushing and pushing and pushing and trying to take over more and more aspects of your life. So, do you want to live free and have personal responsibility, or do you want to live as a slave to the government? The same would also go for the no health service. That would also have to go. So people, again, there'll be people saying, oh, well, what about what poor people going to do if there's no health service? And the answer is, well, there is no health service. The National Health Service doesn't exist now anyway. You try getting an appointment with your GP, or I remember I had an injury from playing football, a knee injury. The National Health Service, they're not interested in that. The only thing that they're ever interested in is putting elderly people into hospital, and then then we know what happens to them after that. It doesn't tend to work out, because we need to have sustainable development and fewer people. So private healthcare, different types of hospital, different types of treatment. Also, we need to have free speech in regard to things. We need to have a battle of ideas in the arenas of health, because what we've got now doesn't work. We've got like a massive obesity problem. We've got loads of people popping pills, chronic illnesses. The current system does not work, right? So, if you sort of say, well, if we get rid of the National Health Service, what are we going to do? Well, look at the current situation. Do you actually want to preserve that? Because I don't. Oh yeah, there's one other thing as well that Marxists will say is that, oh well, you couldn't have a system that's based on private enterprise because there'd be monopolies, and those monopolies would charge high prices. What these Marxists don't know is that it's the state that creates monopolies. So for example, in healthcare, what you would do is get rid of any regulation regarding people being able to operate as a healthcare professional. So if somebody wanted to set up as one of the sheep farm guys as some alternative health practitioner, let them do it. Let there be a battle for ideas. It's the state through regulation that creates monopolies. Exactly the same thing happens in banking. So there was a guy in Burnley, I can't remember what he was called now, but tried to set up a bank because the cartel, the big four banks in Britain, were offering savers nothing in the way of interest rates, whilst charging borrowers ridiculous rates of interest on their loans. So Bank of something it was called, Bank of Fred or something like that. Anyway, the whole programme basically uncovered the fact that it was like next to impossible for anybody to get a banking licence. So the lack of competition in the banking market that was screwing people over wasn't a product of the free market. It was a product entirely of government regulation. So, again, in the future, what we need is a system that's completely liberalised. No government regulations that stop people from practicing as a dentist or as a plumber, or let people's reputations stand before them. That should be, and it should be up to the customer to kind of do a little bit of digging around as to whether they actually want to go and see that particular dentist or health practitioner. That's the way that you solve the problem. And that's also will help to keep prices down as well. If you think about the National Hoax Service, that's a monopoly, or a very, very close to being a monopoly. And it's up against a handful of private providers, and they pay ridiculous amounts of money to buy drugs. What we need is a situation where that's all, the whole healthcare market is completely liberalised, and new firms, new doctors can come and go, and let the customer decide. Okay. Again, there'll be some people, Marxists, will say, if you get rid of all the regulations, the quality control won't be very good. You mean like the quality control of like the Britney Spears and the boosters? You can always rely on the government to control the quality of something, can't you? Not. In terms of healthcare, what I would like is for it to all be private. That doesn't mean that it all has to be for profit. You could have locally owned cooperatives, decentralized providers of healthcare that are owned by the people that use them. So it could be a consumer cooperative, or maybe a workers cooperative, but it would have to be local. So there would be local accountability, and these like odious politicians, power-hungry sociopaths, they can't have any influence over it because it's decentralized. There's too many entities for these people to try to take over and control. As it stands at the moment with the National Hoax Service, it's relatively easy for that to be infiltrated from the top. There's only one organisation, nobble a few people at the top that set the health protocols, and you've nobbled the whole system. So we need to kind of like dispel any notion that the National Hoax Service or anything similar to that run by governments is worth saving. It's not worth saving. So in conclusion then, the new system's falling down. I don't want to replace it with something similar. What I want is something that's based around private enterprise rather than by big government, because you can't trust politicians. I want something that's decentralized rather than centralized, because it's far harder to take over something that's decentralized and corrupt it. And then the final thing is that I want any more of my relationships, my transactions with other people to be done on a voluntary basis. So I choose whether I want to transact with somebody or not, whereas what we have at the moment is way too much compulsion through the tax system and the public sector, and you just get ripped off and exploited, and the money gets siphoned off into the pockets of the politicians and their cronies. There'll be some people that who are lazy, who've never taken responsibility for themselves, who'll find all of this scary, because it'll actually mean that they'll actually have to try to serve their fellow man or woman, and they won't like that. They would prefer to sit at home in their jogging bottoms and do nothing with their lives and have other people serve them without them having to do anything in return, and just rely on mummy government to steal other people's incomes and redistribute it to them on their behalf. So, of course, what role is there for charity? Obviously, like a massive. There's always going to be disabled people. So we also need like a moral renaissance as well, that we actually, because I think what happens with the tax and the benefit system is that people think, well, I don't need to think about other people because the government does that for me. I don't need to worry about helping out homeless people. I don't need to worry about helping out disabled people because the government takes my taxes They take rather a lot of my income, and they're supposed to look after them. So what's happening is that the current system has encouraged people to abdicate their own responsibilities towards their fellow human beings, which is like evil. Basically, there's no other word for that. So no doubt, again, I'm going to get hit in the comments with hardcore socialists who think that we need to, we've had a problem due to big authoritarian government trying to take over, and their solution will be another big authoritarian government that's going to act as their parent, that's going to solve all their problems and take money from one group of people and give it all to them. These people, they've just been indoctrinated in Marxism, basically. But the good news is that I don't think there's as many of them as there are of us. And the current financial system, it's going down. There's way too much debt. The fiat money system's over. So that's going to cause a massive economic crisis, societal crisis, and new political systems will have to emerge. And what I want is a political system based around the individual and voluntary transactions with each other in the private sector, rather than compulsory ones via the state. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say today. So God bless.